will work. So it says we are live.
And this is Bob Davis.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out on this crazy weather this night. So I want to make sure we get audio right. Looks like I'm peeking a little bit. Good. We're on. It's going. I think one way to tell if I'm live is I'll check on my phone, because you never know, right? Is this thing going out anywhere? Is it getting through? And then we'll dive into birds in flight. Figure it out. How many people have already been out there practicing? What's your success rate? Where are you at? Anybody?
I was out there, but not too. There's a few keepers.
A few keepers? So what do you think is holding you back?
Probably be focusing.
Focusing.
Especially, from a distance. If they're close, where the bird can feel like at least half your frame, and that's not a problem with focusing. But
Sure.
when they're further out, that's the issue where, we use like I use a Sony, and it used to be wide focus. And, where they focus multi-pointing, they'll pick whatever is closest. And a lot of times the wing is the closest.
Well, that's what it's all about, is focus, steadiness, fast shutter speeds, and I'm going to go through all this. So let's just jump in and dive in and welcome everybody on who's watching online. Let's see, there's my little bug there. Thanks for tuning in. So we're going to share what I found to work for me. Everybody's different, right? So what works for me might not entirely work for you. So I'm going to share things with you. And the greatest way to figure this all out is to get out there and to shoot and to practice. So if you want to get a hold of me, here's all of our social media. I do answer emails. I do take questions. Happy to be a part of the community. I think the more that we can show the beauty of nature and wildlife to our respective audiences, the more people will care and to think about, what our impact is. There's plenty of wildlife in our area. Right downtown Aurora, there's an eagle's nest, there's an owl's nest. But if you get too close to these animals, you'll spook them away and disturb them. So that's a big thing, is you want to be proper etiquette. And with the lenses and things today that we have, long lenses, super telephotos, steady tripods, gimbals, there's no reason to try and be disruptive. So at any point in time, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to jump in. This eagle photograph was taken at Lock and Dam 14. And Lock and Dam 14, what it's all about there is it's afternoon light. And you want the wind to be hitting you in the face. No, you can leave the light on. Yeah, I think it looks good. And the reason we want that wind hitting you in the face is because then the birds will fly at you. If the wind is at your back, you want the wind at your back, right? So they take off into the wind, the birds. If the wind is in your face, you're going to get a lot of butt shots. You want the wind blowing at your back. So it's like the nose of an airplane. They're going to always take off and land or maneuver for fishing into the wind. It gives them the greatest control. And what's nice about Lock and Dam 14 in the afternoon, and if you have the wind at your back, the light is at your back. So you're shooting with them on sun angles. So you get this beautiful highlight right in their eyes. So this is one of my favorite fishing, eagle hunting photographs I've ever taken, because I like the expression in the moment, and the fish makes it for me, right? The fish is like, oh shit, man, I'm for lunch. So there you go. This was taken with a 600 millimeter lens on a tripod with a gimbal. So we're going to go through gear and we're going to do all that. So I want to start off with some inspiration, some technical. I may seem like a technical photographer only because the more I understand the gear, the better my photographs are, the more the gear gets out of the way. So when it's second nature to whatever feature you want to operate on the camera, then the gear disappears and it's just a tool to capture your vision, right? And I can't stress that enough. Yes, you could put the camera in auto everything and shoot enough frames with the frame rates and the eye tracking and all this stuff. You're going to come out successful, right? But do you want to edit those thousands and thousands and thousands of frames? So I'd rather get dialed in so that I'm utilizing the technology to help me capture the best photograph that I see, my vision, not the vision that the camera has, because the technology is there. We'll review gear, what it takes, and then, of course, it's all about practice. You have to practice. There's a lot in our area, forest preserves, there's songbirds, there's all kinds of the zoo, a lot of the wildlife centers in our area do birds on display with educational birds, and they'll even sometimes fly them. I know at Springbrook up in Itasca, a couple times a year, they'll actually get the owls out that are educational owls and hawks there, and they're on a long lead, and some will fly with just a leather tether, and they put food out and they'll fly and then come back. So it's really good practice to getting birds in flight. I've photographed just about every sport. I worked at the Chicago Sun-Times for 15 years, so I've been blessed to cover a lot of things. And I do have to say, birds in flight have to be one of the most challenging things to be consistently good at. Because A, they're unpredictable. Unlike a sport, you know, if it's baseball, the pitcher's pitching to home plate, right? If he gets the ball, he's looking over his shoulder to second base. It's more predictable. You know, basketball, there's a basket at each end. You know where they're going, right? So you could get prepared for that. While you can have an educated guess with birds, meaning set yourself up with light and wind, any animal, it's up to them, right? It's unpredictable. But if you study the bird before you go out, like if you're going out looking for sandhill cranes, they're a large bird, they have a long neck, they're much easier to capture, they fly slower, and they don't fly as erratic, changing directions. So you could set your camera up to do that. But small birds like songbirds, oh my God, they're incredibly tough because they're so tiny, and by the time I catch them in the frame, they're already gone. You know, so the smaller the bird, the faster the shutter speed you need, right? So light, of course, plays a big part of it. This is one of my favorite photographs down here in the lower left. That's sunrise in Hokkaido, Japan, and those are the red-crested cranes, red-crowned crane. They're about 5.5 feet tall. They're endangered. And so I went there, we took a group there to Japan, and it was absolutely amazing. The rest of these sandhill cranes are a mixture of Bosque del Apache, which is in New Mexico. We lead a workshop there every year, which is amazing, beautiful sunrises and sunsets. You do have predictability that they're going to come in the morning and take off, and then come in the evening and roost. So you do have some predictability that way as to where they're going to be. And then you could do a study in light and behavior. You also have Jasper Pulaski, the Indiana, it's in Indiana, it's about 60 miles from here, but the Indiana Department of Natural Resources, you could get on their website, and during the migration season for the sandhills, they'll email you the sandhill counts. So it's the same as now, we could find out the eagle counts if you just Google search eagle counts on the Mississippi River. Well, the department, the Army Corps of Engineers, once a week posts eagle counts at all the lock and dams along the Mississippi River through Illinois and Iowa. Some puffins up in Newfoundland. And this is just a little inspiration. A bunch of different birds and, you know, variety of things that we've photographed. And wonder why it's not on the screen. I don't know why it's not on the screen. Did the projector time out? Good times, right? It's going out live, but why did that screen? Did the projector time out? I think it did. I don't see the light coming from the projector. You have the remote, so that killed the audio as well. Good timing for the light bulb to go out. But these are all amazing, wonderful places to go. Zaxxon Bog, Loons in Michigan in the summertime. And a long lens is really key. You know, these are majority of these. My prime lens for birds is a 600. And then oftentimes I have a 1.4 teleconverter, so effectively it's an 840 at aperture 5.6. And then of course I have a 24 to 105, and I'm going to go through the gear bag here in a second when we get to the gear section. And I wish you guys could see this, but it'll be on Facebook Live. So it's actually going out, the signal's going out, so we're doing good there. And if you pull up your phones on my Facebook page, you'll be able to see it. It's there. It's a good monitor. I don't know what happened to the project. It's all red. So I try and go for moments in time to tell the story of the particular bird. Oh, it was there, now it's gone. Let me pause this for a second. Let the projector come back online. Good times. I see a green flashing light. Projector's warming up. So to anybody who's out there online, if you have any questions, please drop them in the feed and I'll get to them. Hey, Jay Bryant, Cheryl, Carol, Frank, how's it going? People out there. Oh, here we go. We've got it. Got the projector back up, so let me continue running this. Pelicans on the Mississippi River. You go out on a boat, you can get close to the barrier islands that are there. Now some of these islands have been washed away. The last couple of years we've had a lot of water. But there's plenty of rookeries around. If you do your research with DuPage Forest Preserve, Will County, there's a big rookery in Will County. There's one up in Lake County. So there's plenty of wildlife all around us. These are from Africa, so giraffes at a watering hole. Favorite bird is lilac-breasted roller. Amazing. Birds are predictable, right? So if you get to a spot and you think things look really good, you arrive there and then they take off. If you stand quietly and let them get used to your presence, because they do know we're there, there's no fooling them, then they'll start coming back because they have their favorite perches, right? They'll perch, circle, fly, hunt, come back to the perch. So they're very predictable, but it's nature. You gotta have patience. Patience with wildlife is key. Projector's getting wonky again. Eagle, yep, there it goes. I don't know what's happening there. Let me plug this in and unplug it again. Do you have the remote, Dave? You could hit OK. Should be coming up. There we go. So when I was sharing with you before about the lilac-breasted roller, is we were on safari with this guy, and I've wanted to get a really good picture of them perch. They're a small bird. They're a little bit smaller than a robin. Most colorful, beautiful bird in Africa. But they'll hunt insects and they'll fly off and come back. And when you first pull up in your safari vehicle, they scatter. But if you watch from a distance before you get close enough, you'll see their pattern. Like they'll go from this branch to that tree, down to the ground, pick up some insects, and then they'll fly back. So we pulled up by this branch, and then we parked and we waited. So this is the 600 millimeter f4. Now the key, remember, the smaller the bird, the faster the shutter speed you'll need. So a bird of this size, I'm going to start off at 2,000th of a second and go up from there. Don't worry about ISO, right? ISO these days is almost irrelevant. And if people see the noise, then the photograph isn't good enough, right? If you look at some of the greatest historic photographs of our time, you know, they're grainy, they're soft focus and things like that, but the moment is there, the impact is there. No one's looking back at, you know, a photograph when it was shot on film saying, oh, look at the grain, right? But we've become obsessed with zooming in 200% and saying, oh, look at the noise. Well, again, if you're focused on the noise, then the picture isn't good enough, in my opinion. So same thing, keyed up the drive to high-speed drive, and this is with a 1DX Mark II, so it was, you know, 10 frames per second. Now the R3 is 30 frames per second. And oh my God, the nuances you can see. So you just time it. He popped off this perch, and they give you indications of what they're going to do. So the birds will kind of squat down and jump. If it's a big raptor, they're going to lighten the load. They're going to poop, usually before they leave the branch. And remember, they're always going to take off into the wind. So fast shutter speed is your friend, and we just track the bird right from the perch. We're linear with him, so it's not like he's flying at me, so it's much easier to photograph him as he takes off. Right, so this was 4,000th of a second and 1,000 ISO. I wanted that soft, buttery background because there was some shrubs and trees in the background. I wanted them to really be out of focus. So that was my choice for f4. A lot of times with birds in flight, especially a bigger bird like a crane, something that has a long neck, or even eagles, 6.3 or 7.1 is usually where my aperture is, because I want from the tip of the beak to the talons in focus. If you photograph everything wide open and it photographs just on its head, by the time it gets out to the wings, they're already soft focus. Or like you saw that photograph with the eagle with the fish, if I was wide open on that, the fish probably would be soft, right? So I want to make sure I'm at that 6.3 to 7.1 to give me a little bit of depth to account for about that 12 inches. That's about all the depth you'll get with a 600 or 600 with 1.4 at 7.1, right? And depth of field is also a factor of your closeness to the subject. So if the bird is 100 feet away, we're going to have more depth of field at 7.1 than if the bird is 20 feet away at 7.1. And that's a factor of depth with any lens. It's something to be aware of. So camera settings and focus. Oh my God, today you have so many choices with cameras that it could be confusing, and so many cases. So what cases is how the camera reacts to the movement of your subject, right? I'm very versed in deep knowledge with Canon. I'm a Canon Explorer of Light, so I know them intimately. But pretty much all your cameras today have very similar settings. So they all have face tracking and eye tracking. I'm talking about mirrorless. Boy, now that I've gone mirrorless, I'll never go back, because when you pick up a digital SLR, it just feels old and antiquated because you're limited to the scene of focus points. Usually they're just in the center, and they won't track across the entire field of view. Where all the newer cameras today, especially mirrorless, if you activate tracking, you could activate either animal or human, and boom, it's going to lock right onto your subject and track it across the entire field of view. It's incredible. It's almost like cheating, you know, but it really does increase your odds of capturing a higher yield of successful photographs. I'll show you a take I did last week with the EOS R3, which I just got, that it was about 98% everything in focus. When it wasn't in focus, it was my error trying to think, well, maybe I should take it out of tracking. Maybe I should do this, right? It's just gotten so incredible. So you can see they have these different cases, and all your cameras have the ability to tell the camera about your subject. Is it going to move linear? Is it going to stop and start and change directions erratically? So they have all this data programmed into your camera's processor to help it be more successful for the subject that you're photographing. So for most of my with the DSLR, I was using case 6, right? Because it's for subjects that change speed and move erratically, and that's what birds do. They accelerate, they decelerate, like an eagle in flight could be making a dive and all of a sudden pull up and almost hover. It hits the air brakes until it sees its prey again, and then boom, dive, right? And as long as you can keep it in the frame, it'll track it really, really well. Now you could tweak those settings as well to speed them up and to slow them down. And that's what you have to do by trial and error. Now they've added a case automatic, case A, at least with Canon. And what that does is it's going to recognize your movement and the subject moving within the frame and try and curtail that to the subject. And I've had great success with case A, automatic. So these are cases that I've done with the 1DX Mark III and digital SLRs, and then also mirrorless. I was using both cameras for a while because migrating from a digital SLR to a mirrorless camera, there is a bit of a learning curve, right? Sometimes you have to unlearn what you learned. So when I was using a digital SLR, I used back button focus all the time because it's not tracking, right? So as the subject comes onto your focus point, you can control when you're focusing and when you're shooting. But with face tracking and recognition, it's locked on, so I keep pretty much focus always on the shutter button. Because as I lift my finger off the shutter to stop shooting, it will continually track within my frame, and then I can capture that moment, instead of me having to start and stop focus. Now I do have custom functions with the camera, and I do have another button programmed for focus stop, right? Because sometimes you want the camera to stop and you tweak it with manual focus. Like if an eagle flies into a tree, and I'll show you these scenes in a second, the camera might jump to focus on the branches. Well, then I'm going to hit focus stop, and I could manually take over, or I could set it back to single shot and a single point, precision point that I'll put on the bird if I can navigate it through the branches. But you have so many choices to increase your success and odds. So these are, again, the back of the Canon. If you don't have a Canon camera, dive into your manuals. Sony has these, Nikon has these, Olympus has these, Fuji has these. They all call them something a little bit different, but you're trying, again, fine-tune that camera to focus to meet the subject. Kind of make sense? Any questions? No?
Well, that's what I've been doing with mine. You know, I got the A9.
Yes.
And I've been playing around with the focus tracking on that.
Right.
And, you know, taking your advice, taking Garrett's advice, and then meshing the two together and coming out with a happy, what works for me.
Exactly. That's what everybody has to do is you go through these, they're computers, right? And you can fine tune them to you. They've almost given us too many choices. Nowadays, every button and dial on the camera is customizable. You could set it up. No two cameras for two users can be the same. You know, where it used to be, you grab a camera and you knew, was it back button or front button focus? And that was it. And everything else was kind of the same. Now, like I said, I could have one button to change the focus, meaning, do I want to allow it to track? Do I want to go to a precision? Do I want to go to a cluster? So I have one button set to scroll through that. So all focus points, precision, single focus point, a bracket box, and then a cluster of 5. So if I don't even have to take my eye away from the viewfinder and I move my thumb over to the AF on button, and if I depress it, it's going to scroll through those focus settings. So if I'm allowing it to track, and then it lands in the trees, I could just click, now it's in precision. And then I can allow it to focus through the branches instead of, what autofocus does is it's going to go for contrast and brightness. So if it loses the bird in the branches, well, then it's going to focus on the branches, right? Because it can't track through there unless it's pretty dominant. It will track behind objects and through objects if it's passing, but if it flies into brush and stays there, well, then it's going to lose it, and then you're going to get all the focus points lighting up on the branches. I could show some examples of that. So I've made adjustments to most of the cases, which may not seem intuitive, but I'll get to that in a second. Here's where I was saying on all the different focus points that you have at your disposal. This is the same for Canon, whether it's a DSLR or a mirrorless. The only advantage with mirrorless is, again, the tracking, and you have your entire field of view as focus points. You're no longer limited to a cluster in the center. Like the 1DX, I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember, I think it's maybe 45 or 60 focus points dead center of the frame. So even if you allow it to track, which it will only track within that zone. So you kind of have to keep everything centered. So it's really an advantage, the capabilities that you have with mirrorless. Now, do you need to upgrade? No. If your DSL is working for you and you're happy with it, stick with it, right? The best tool you have is the one you're using. It's just get in deep with that tool and exploit it to the best of your degree.
Could you say that again?
Oh,
Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you.
Siri, I'm not talking to you right now. She always jumps right in. So here's the different cases, case 1, case 2, and here's where you could change and tweak these cases. So this might seem a little counterintuitive, but sometimes we want to slow down the way the camera focuses, right? What I mean by that is if you're trying to track a bird in flight and you come off of the bird, and I'm not talking with tracking, I'm talking with a cluster. So if you come off it and lose it on a focus point, if you have it set to fast, the camera's rapidly looking for something to focus on. It'll jump to the sky, or it might rack out and then come back in because it lost it. If you slow down that focus, it'll give you a moment to reacquire before it starts hunting for something. Now you speed up the reaction time, meaning how fast it'll jump from focus point to the maximum. So as it crosses zones with focus points, it rapidly will track that. That makes sense. So here's how you can kind of go through these things with your custom functions, changing your focus marks. And previous, if you have a DSLR and you have live view, that's basically a mirrorless camera, right? But the disadvantage is you have to hold it out here like this. All cameras that have live view will critically focus much better in live view than with the prism, because essentially, especially for shooting wide open and shallow depth of field, the camera has to focus twice. It focuses once on the mirror so that you could see it looking through the viewfinder, then the mirror lifts up and it instantaneously has to focus to the image sensor. So that's why they gave us the adjustments for micro focus adjustment, back focus, front focus. What you're doing is you're tweaking that reaction as the mirror goes up and down where that is focusing on to the image sensor. You don't have that challenge with mirrorless. And you wouldn't have that challenge if you were photographing with your DSLR in live view, because then it's focusing always off the image sensor. But that's not very convenient to try and track wildlife to be out here like this, right?
Yeah, that is a disadvantage with the DSLR. Basically, the mirror flips up, and you can't, switch back and forth between the back and the viewfinder.
Very true.
Mirrorless, and it shouldn't change the focus.
Right.
You could do that with DSLR.
The DSLR, yeah, that's kind of its drawback. Another advantage to mirrorless is what you see is what you get, right? Especially if you have exposure simulation active. So you see your color, you see your exposure, and you can even pull up a live histogram if you want to guess, like, where are my highlights, where are my shadows? You could see that right in the viewfinder. So there's no reason to really be messing with your exposure in post, or color for that matter. You could tweak your contrast, saturation, all those other things, but this allows you to have a more streamlined workflow on the back end instead of allowing the camera to have everything in auto, right? So I like to quote a friend of mine, Charles Glatzer, same light, same exposure. His statement makes perfect sense, and this is the way I've always photographed, is if manual mode. If you had an incident light meter, right? Bird lands on the perch right there, sunlight on it, and it has a dark background like this, right? If you took your incident light meter, with the dome, you took the light meter reading, that light meter is giving you the reading of the light falling in this scene. Follow me? So let's say it's 1,000 at f4 at 400 ISO. That bird takes off like the lilac-breasted roller, flies up to the sky. Should the exposure be any different? No? The light didn't change, right? Same light, same exposure. But if you're in something auto, like auto ISO or aperture priority, it's going to compensate because now all of a sudden we don't have a dark background. We have a bright sky behind it. So then when you get home, you're going to have to adjust for the sky, right? So birds in flight, auto ISO, in an evaluative metering, you're automatically at +1 because you have to compensate for the brightness of the sky to get detail in the darkness of the feathers and the birds and wings and things like that, right? So same light, same exposure. So that's why if we're not in light that's changing, like with clouds, or if it's all cloud overcast, I'll look through the viewfinder, I'll take a test shot, evaluate my color, evaluate my exposure. I kind of expose a little bit to the right so that we're not brightening the image too much, because when we do that, if there's no information in the shadows and you overexpose it in post, you're adding noise. I'd rather expose for the shadows like film and develop for the highlights, unless you're shooting JPEG. That's like shooting chromes in the old days. Then you really can't overexpose more than 1/3 of a stop, because once those highlights are gone, they're gone. Where I normally would expose probably 2/3 of a stop over, but you want to be careful with eagles, because if you blow out the white feathers, when they're gone, they're gone. You know, and you only have about 1.5 stops, maybe 2 stops of recovery with highlights, you know, in post. So that's where you could turn on the blinkies in your camera, and that's where it's a highlight indicator, and that lets you know that there's no information in those highlights if they're blinking. If the entire head is blinking white, well, then there's no detail there no matter what you do. So you're kind of looking for that balance of getting maybe a slight blink there or no blink, right? While still having detail in the dark feathers under the wings. So any native software we're going to talk about next gives you the most information about your camera and the file. So what I'm showing here is this is the 1DX Mark III. So it shows the focus pattern of all the focus points that are available to you. And it shows when you're using the entire zone, which one is active that it's picking up on. And it will also show you deep in the information field everything about that file, what your focus was, what all the settings were, in greater detail than Lightroom or anything else. So if you have Sony and you really want to learn what's working, where were your focus settings, was it sped up, was it slowed down, look at the Sony. If you're using Nikon, look at Nikon, because they give you far more information than you'll ever get. Here's an example in the native software. With this owl taking off, you could see the red focus marks are what were active, right? Now the 1DX did have face tracking for animals and things, but you could only see that activity if you were in live view. It could be active in the DSLR mode, but you couldn't exactly know what was tracking what, because you're only seeing, again, the mirror representation of it. You don't see these red marks lighting up, right? You might see one. So it gives you the whole idea of what's going on and where the focus was. So you could see it's not exactly on the face, it's on the chest. And if you're photographing again, wide open, you can see my aperture is f8 on this image because I wanted talons to wings in focus, right? I still have the eyes in focus because we allowed for that, 6 to 12 inches depth of field. Where if I was at 5.6 wide open or aperture 4 on this 600 millimeter lens, well, it would be 5.6 because this is the 600 millimeter with the 1.4, so that goes from from aperture 4 to 5.6, right? Lose 1 stop of light. So I went to f8 to just give us a little bit of cushion. And again, 2,000th of a second because I wanted to capture and freeze the wings. And you could even see still at 2,000th of a second, the tips of the wings have slight motion, right? At 2,000th of a second. So this is an overcast day. But you could see all the information that we get, all the way down to picture style, sharpness, everything about it. What case it was in, the acceleration, everything about it. And this is how you learn to tweak your camera for what you want, right? And that's why I was saying it may seem like a real technical presentation, but the more you understand this, the more success you'll have in the field. Oh, I'm getting soft pictures because my shutter speed was low and I was in single point focus, right? This way here, you'll be able to see what's what. Same thing here. Now here, I'm choosing a single point focus because we have a cluttered background, and the background essentially has a little bit more contrast than the bird. So I chose a precision single point and focused right on the neck. He moved, it was on his head, but then he stood up. You know what I mean? So you do the best you can. But going back to mirrorless, here's where that advantage is I've done very similar things with the R6, the R3, the R5. Boom, it stays locked on that bird. And if it loses its head, it goes to the body. As soon as it could see the head, it goes right to the head and eye. And they all do this. Canon, Nikon, Sony, Olympus, they all do this really, really well. Here you could see, boom, right on the eye, right? But tons of information. You don't get this level of information. You don't see the focus points with Lightroom. You don't get this level of information as to what your focus settings were, what your details were, you know, all of that. You basically just get, you know, shutter speed, ISO, was it in servo, was it in one shot, things like that. This is with the R5. And again, I changed up the case to case 2 with zone focusing. So see that entire square box? So that's what I was saying before, is I've now programmed my AF on button to cycle through one precision focus mark, the cluster, this whole entire box, a cluster of 5, and then the entire field of view. Now, the reason I didn't choose the entire field of view with this is because as these geese were taking off, there were distracting elements that had brighter contrast than them. And I knew that from looking at the scene. So I wanted to minimize where the camera had to look to get into focus. And every one of these frames in the sequence were in focus. Where I have done this previously and learned by error, oh, I'm just going to let it select. Well, you can see the birds are kind of less contrast, less light on them. Those twigs in the background with white is very contrasty. And boom, it would jump to there. And then it would try and come back as soon as the bird was more dominant in it. So that's what I mean. It's learning how those techniques work, what works best for you, and tweaking the settings. Questions, thoughts? No? Good? All right. Again, just more information. This is a great example of how I'm trying to track these two eagles, and I lost them completely. The focus mark is nowhere on them, but because I slowed down focus reaction, it gave me time to recapture them, and these birds are still in focus, right? In the past, I thought, oh, wait a minute, I want this thing to focus really fast, and I sped that up, and my yield went way down because the minute you come off, it's thinking, all right, I got to find something to focus on, and it's looking. Same thing, right? The focus marks are on the sky, not exactly on the head, but by slowing it down, that didn't immediately go to the sky. It allowed me a chance to recover. And this is dead on sharp. Burrowing owls, little off-camera flash. The light was flat, the scene was flat. So this is with a 600 millimeter lens. Make sure I'm correct. Yep, 600 millimeter f4. I had one flash off to the side, and it's adding that catch light in the owl's eyes and allowing me to create light. So there's times I definitely use flash. One time we took a trip, that same trip to Japan, we were photographing snow monkeys, snowing like it was last night, crazy, really flat light. Well, I added one flash across the pond and one flash here. I was cross-lighting it, mixing it with the ambient light, and I had great specularity in their eyes, right? You're shooting at a higher ISO, so it's not like a woof of light. It's just this little kiss of light that gives you a highlight in the eye. And for me, that brings it to life.
So the flash isn't gonna bother them.
Not necessarily, unless you're in a really dark situation. If you're in a daylight situation, no, not really. I haven't had any birds get skittish from it and fly away. These little owls, they're burrowing owls in Florida, they're about that big, you know, they were just, what are you doing? You know, looking at you. And the flash isn't overpowering. Like, I'm not trying to overpower the daylight. I'm just trying to add that little kiss of light. It's such a blink that they look right at you. And owls have big sensitive eyes.
That's right.
Now, if it was at night and an owl was perched in a tree, yeah, that could spook them, right? If that's all of a sudden this big spotlight on them. I wouldn't do it then. Focus. So I switch back and forth between one shot and servo, and there's a reason. So one shot means the camera's going to focus one time, then take the picture. Servo, it's continuously looking for focus. So I program, and I'll get my 600 out here in a second, show you what's in my bag. There's a button on the lens. That switches me from one shot to servo. So as soon as a bird goes on a branch or it goes into trees or branches someplace challenging, I'm going to go to one shot and the precision focus mark, right? So that it increases my odds of success. Because if you have it in servo, it's like, uh-oh, there's a leaf blowing and we have contrast and it keeps blowing in front of the focus mark. Well, it's going to keep going, whoop, 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 whoop. So there's a reason to slow it down to let's go for one shot. If we're in flight, well, then it's time to put it in servo, right? And all these things now can be done right through the viewfinder, especially with mirrorless, because all your information is seen on the electronic viewfinder. So I'm not trying to push mirrorless, I'm just trying to share what's the difference between them. Here's a variety of beautiful, beautiful birds. And these are all done in one shot because they've landed, they've perched. I'm going to go to less focus points so that I could control, I'll put it right on their head, right? Previously with the DSLR. Even sometimes now, I'll want to make sure that it's going to focus because, like, look at the eagle here. Its body is big and bulky. There's a nice highlight on his chest. And I have had this happen when we have it in face tracking. It will focus on the body, not the head. And if I don't have enough depth of field, sometimes I am wide open, well, then the eyes are soft. And for me, that kills the photo. The eyes are soft. So every one of these, the yellow bird is flash, right? You can see the highlight on the branches. It's a little fill flash. And again, it's in open shade and there would be no catch light in the eye. David, you had a question?
Well, I just wanted to mention, I watched the video last night, and I posted it on my Facebook, the David G. Dowell one, where the gentleman was going that Sony kind of killed the DSLR with the mirrorless.
Pretty much all of them.
Yeah, Sony hasn't made a DSLR in quite a while, and Nikon and Canon aren't either.
No, nobody's making a DSLR anymore.
So
There's really,
it's going to be going.
yeah.
That is the way of the future, or the next best thing.
You get so much more information with the mirrorless, let alone the speed that they write and could take photographs because we don't have a physical mirror moving. It eliminates a lot of vibration and movement within the camera and then throw on top of it tracking. Oh my God. And you get the entire field of view. We're no longer limited to, let's call 45 focus points, pretty much clustered in the center. And as I shared before, these cameras now are completely customizable. You could go through and you could program every button. And they're all that way. It's not just Canon, Sony, Nikon, you know, all of them. Everybody allows you to program these buttons with different features. So whatever feels intuitive to you when it's in your hands, you can set it up for it.
Yeah. And the nice thing is that Canon's trying to keep the DSLR settings the same as in the mirrorless.
It is.
Nikon's doing the same thing. So everything's familiar.
Yes. It is a super big advantage that they've kept the menu structure and the names and the functions the same across the line going from DSLR to mirrorless. Otherwise, you're hunting and pecking. And now you can save your settings. A lot of cameras, you could save your settings to a card. I've uploaded my settings to my Dropbox. I keep them on my computer because let's say I'm traveling. We're at a workshop, we're in Japan, and my camera goes down, right? My R3, my R5, whatever the case may be. Well, I could rent one in Tokyo, and then I could just download my settings from my Dropbox, or I usually keep it on a card in my camera bag, put my card in that camera, load my settings, now it's my camera. All my custom functions and buttons are set. That's huge, right? Then you don't have to go through all the different menus. Again, because there's so many settings.
Right, it's very time consuming.
Very time consuming. Like the R that I'm going to use here for one of our remote cameras so that we could see the original EOS R, you can't save the settings. So what I've done is I've taken a screenshot of every screen of the menus. So I have to go through, what was my settings on the R? Because that camera, you can't save the settings to a card. You can't save them anywhere. Very frustrating. Drive modes are really important, especially now with mirrorless, because who wants to go through 30 frames per second and then edit all that? There are times I will use 30 frames per second, like Eagles fishing. And the nuances that 30 frames per second capture give you such a dynamic range of photographs to choose from that you're starting to see the inner eyelid close and get it between feathers, things that I've never seen before because of the frame rate that it could capture, right? So there are times I use 30 frames per second, which is continuous high speed, and there are times when I slow that down. And it's even nice now you have true silent mode. So at Lock and Dam 15, for instance, the eagle could land where that backdrop is, let's say 30 feet away. I'll put the camera in silent mode, so if I'm standing here, you don't get the click, 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 click. That's going to distract the bird and spook it and make it fly away. Another huge advantage, right? That's silent mode. So that's just, all this technology is just amazing to set us up for success. Do you get any distortion with the silent mode in terms of what you'd call rolling shutter? It depends on what camera and where it is in the lineup. Currently with Canon's R3, no. With the R, yes. If you're shooting at a fast shutter speed, like 2,000th of a second, there will be things, especially round objects, you'll get some distortion. And the reason being is read out, right? An electronic shutter, what happens is it's no longer opening and closing. Physical shutter. It's more like your TV. It's scanning from top to bottom, left to right. It's scanning. And that readout is where that distortion goes, because as it's here, your object is moving. So by the time it completes its scan, a baseball could look like a football. Now the R3 has such a fast readout, and the Nikon Z9 and the Sony A1, the readout off the image sensor and the scan is so fast that is minimized. Even at super high shutter speeds, 2, 4, and 8,000th of a second, minimal distortion, right? You don't really see that. So this is just a sequence of an eagle capturing a fish, and I believe these are all 2,500th of a second or higher. So the cameras and lenses that I use, I'm no longer using the 1DX Mark III. I didn't sell it. I'm just going to launch it and put it up for sale this month because the confidence I have with the mirrorless system. The R3 is a fantastic camera for fast-moving things, birds in flight. The R5 for me has the larger file size. So if I'm going to do portraits or even wildlife, it's a great wildlife camera, and you want to really crop in, you're starting off with 45 megapixels. But, I'm old school. I come from film, so I tend to shoot as tight as possible. So, that always hasn't been a big factor for me. But the 600 millimeter lens, that's my go-to lens. The 100 to 500 is great, but if you're in low light, at the long end, you're at 7.1, You throw on a 1.4 converter, which makes this lens a 700 millimeter lens, and we're at f11, or maybe not f11, f10, something like that. So I use them both, but when I was at Bosque at sunrise, and you could hear the sandhills and the snow geese and everything getting ready to take off, well, I got the 600 f4 on because I can get to f4, right, and still have that reach. So there's a reason to have certain lenses. So wildlife, I love wildlife. This baby elephant was playing with this bird. They were having fun with each other. The bird was hopping from branch to branch, kind of like playing tag with them. So it's just fun. And talked about the gear. That's the 600 f4 version 3. I use that on the EOS R with the RF to EF adapter. Nikon makes an adapter, Sony makes an adapter. I haven't noticed any performance loss at all with using older lenses. In fact, I've noticed the opposite. I have a 30-plus-year-old Canon 200 1.8 lens that really didn't focus that well on a digital SLR at 1.8. You'd have to take 10 frames to get one in focus. Well, with the mirrorless, I could shoot all day long at 1.8, right? And it's in focus. Mm-hmm.
What is the difference with the two options? Because they have the one that's the $99 and they have the $199.
Sure, there's three. Canon makes 3 different adapters. One is just a straight up adapter, meaning you could mount an EF lens onto an R body. The other one has a control ring on it. That's the next one up. So what the control ring does is it allows you to program that ring to anything you want. I have my control ring set for exposure compensation, so up or down. You could program it for white balance. You could program it to be aperture, anything. The next one they make is it has a drop-in filter. So you could drop in a polarizer or a neutral density filter, but it doesn't have the control ring. It just has the drop-in filter capability. So I have a 11 to 24 EF lens. It's amazing. I doubt if I'll ever get rid of that lens. But the front element is this big. And if you want to get a polarizer on that, that's really inconvenient. But now with the drop-in, sweet. Or if you want to do any long exposures with a neutral density, you could drop that in there.
So you think though, between those first two, the 99 and the 199, that 199 step
Has a control ring, the next one up. Yeah. Yeah. And if I've found the control ring to be very useful. So again, the 1DX Mark III, at the time, I thought that was the best camera I ever used. It's still a great camera, but now it feels old because it doesn't do all the intuitive things that I can do with the R system. So by no means is it a slouch camera, but I've embraced the new technology and it just agrees with the way I work. And even more so, the gear is out of the way, right? I don't have the limitation like, oh, I want to be really off-center composition and I want one focus point way over here. Well, I don't have to focus and recompose, none of that stuff, right? I'm not limited or constrained. And the huge advantage to what you see is what you get. No longer do I have to go in live view or take a test shot to make sure my color and exposure are in. What you see is what you get. Huge for me. Well worth it. So R5, R6, I just got the R3s, so I haven't included a slide on that. So I've sold the R6 because I have the R3s. Essentially, they're very similar animals. The R6 was a 20 megapixel, where this is a 24 megapixel. And the R3 is all about speed. Birds in flight, I want speed. I want a fast frame count. I want fast focus. It has eye control capability, which Canon had way back when on a film camera. But you could calibrate it. These glasses I use for reading and seeing the computer screen. But when I'm photographing, the R3 has the ability to program to either eye, which I've registered both eyes. And what I look at is where it will focus. And then, dig this. If I start looking here and it's focusing and I have tracking active, it will continue to track what I looked at. It'll start there and then stay with the subject. I'm like, oh my God, I'm cheating.
That was the A2.
The Canon A2E, yeah, with the eye. Yeah, I had that film camera. That was amazing. That was amazing. And it's even better with the R3. Far more accurate. As I was sharing before, this is my kind of prime wildlife lens. The version 3 is very lightweight. You know, you can hand hold it, which I oftentimes do. But if we're going to be, again, somewhere where you're watching birds fly, like at the lock and dam, then we're going to go and use a tripod with a gimbal. For stability, you can slow down your shutter speed then. And if you are a little shaky with a long lens, that gets magnified out, even if you have a high shutter speed and even if you're using image stabilization. I would even suggest that if you're using very high shutter speeds, 2,000, 4,000th of a second, turn off image stabilization. Because what I've had happen is at a high frame rate, at that fast shutter speed, you are going to catch photographs that are slightly blurry because the image stabilization element is moving, the image sensor is moving, and the shutter and the frame rate is so fast, it's catching those in between frames where the IS is all trying to work together, right? So if you're using a gimbal and a high shutter speed, turn it off. You'll have much sharper photographs. So I generally use IS if I'm shooting at a shutter speed less than the focal length of the lens. So if it's a 600 millimeter lens, if I'm less than 1,000th of a second, I'll activate IS. So these are all the lineup of the RF lenses. I still use the EF extenders on the EF 600 millimeter lens with the adapter, and I haven't noticed any loss at all, or loss in performance or sharpness. So I do use the wide angles as well. And this is the flash setup that I use. So it's Canon Speedlight and then a mag beam on it. There used to be this thing, there probably still is, the better beamer. But the reason I like the mag beam is because all the light is confined. Nothing gets out. So the better beamer is completely open and it has a Fresnel lens in the front. So when that light hits it, of course, light bounces off of it and reflects out. Well, then you lose some volume of light. Where this confines the light and it gives you more efficient use of the flash. Bags, monopods, whatever it takes to get it into the field. I love think tank bags, Pro Media Gear gimbal, and tripod. And I always use the gimbal if I'm at the lock and dam because they're circling everywhere. And after a while, by the time I get that lens up after half a day, you know, even though it's light, it does get tiring. And then when you have 3 layers of clothes on and everything else, it does get to be challenging. Photographing an osprey's nest. Well, here I had to hike out to where this nest was, so I used the monopod so I could be steady. So I did, once I got them in flight and they landed on the nest box, well then I slowed down the shutter speed so that I could increase my depth of field, right? Now we got the entire nest in focus. No reason to not roll some video. All the cameras are capable of it. And another great advantage with mirrorless, while the 1DX did video, you had to go out here like this, right? And it's hard with the bright sunlight and all that. Now with your cameras, you just activate video and you're looking through the viewfinder and you could track much better.
And that's the microphone in your camera?
What's that?
And that was the microphone in the camera?
Yeah, it's so advantageous. So again, should you upgrade? That's a personal question. If what you have is working for you, then use it. Use it until the gear feels like it's holding you back, you know. And my wife asked me, like, you're doing fine with your cameras. Why are you going with all this mirrorless stuff? Because now the gear gets out of the way. You know, she's our business manager. She used to be an accountant, so I have to account for everything. Talked a lot about the difference between DSLR, mirrorless, full frame, crop sensors. You know, it's all a new game out there. The sensors are so great. Sony's coming out, or they already do, I believe, have a crop sensor camera. The R5, you could actually punch in. You're actually cropping in on the image sensor so you could get that 1.6 feel. So it goes effectively from 45 megapixels down to about 16. Now with the R3, I wouldn't zoom in electronically and crop in to that 1.6 crop factor, because now we're going from 24 megapixels probably down to 9, give or take, in that range. You know, so just put on the 1.4. What's, yeah, they all give you that option. So you just want to, you know, I mean, really, 9. I remember when the Nikon D1 came out, what was that, 4? And the first Canon was 4. So it's a whole new world. And with software today, you could res things up. So never let that hold you back. And don't let ISO hold you back. Don't be afraid to use the proper ISO to get to the parameters that you need. If I need to shoot at 3200th of a second at f8 and it's bright daylight and I'm at 2500 ISO, so be it. That's what it takes to accomplish those goals. Again, the image sensors are so clean, software at your capability to help with noise. If you see the noise, then the photograph doesn't have enough impact. All right, so let's kind of dive into the gear, and we'll go from there, see what's in the bag. So I'll minimize this. Here we go. Pop this camera back on. All right. There we go. Cool. So we'll talk about support first. If I'm hiking out to some place remote, like the other morning, I was hiking around Lockport Prairie. There was a deer carcass frozen on the river back there, and coyotes and eagles were feeding on it. I didn't want to hike out there with the tripod. You know, it slows you down, all those sorts of things, so I used a monopod. So Pro Media Gear monopod, there's all kinds of great monopods out there, whatever works for you. But this has a nice tilt head on it. So what I could do is once I'm in place is I can lean forward, I could pull back, and I could tilt the head instead of being so rigid with, oh, if you ever try and go look up in the sky and it's just on the monopod itself, you're really cranking back like that, right? So this tilt head is a big advantage. It's lightweight, carbon fiber, it's a great job. If you're going to be out early in the morning or if you're going to be doing birds in flight, you know, I can't stress enough the importance of a gimbal head and a good sturdy tripod, right? You want a good sturdy heavyweight tripod, again, for steadiness. You have your nice fluid gimbal. It gives us all access, so we'll go through the gear and we'll load it up, get that on there next. I get all my gear into the field if I'm hiking, and I use this Mindshift Think Tank backpack because I could get everything I need in it, and it's very comfortable, right? I could hike a long distance with this, and it's very comfortable. So this is the Backlight Elite 45 liter. I took this with me to Bosque. I got everything in here I needed, laptop, backup hard drives, all those things. So you got another top piece that goes on here, but in the top lid, got 15 to 35, you know, I'll have a headlight in here, get everything I want, extra batteries, speed light. So here's the mag beam. So you put the rubber band on, and then we get the mag beam on, and then we extend it out. And now this will throw the light the distance of the 600 millimeter lens where we're focusing, right? So if you activate it, and then you could see how it creates that spotlight effect, right? That's exactly what it's doing. It's confining that light to throw further. See, it goes all the way up there, right? So it's really nice, efficient use Songbirds it's great for. Anything that you want to get a little catch light in the eye. It's great for portraits as well. I use it on portraits. So this is the Canon Speedlight EL1 because it is the most efficient for high-speed sync, and oftentimes when I'm doing birds, I'm using high-speed sync, that fast shutter speed again, and because it's native, there really isn't any issue going with high-speed sync. Sometimes with secondary brands, high-speed sync, once you get over 2,000th of a second, doesn't become that efficient, you know, it struggles. High-speed sync is kind of like fuzzy logic. Batteries, plenty of extra batteries. Again, with mirrorless, you're going to go through more batteries because everything is electronic. Electronic viewfinder, electronic review screen, electronic shutter instead of the mechanical. So more batteries. In my outer lid, I always have an electronic cable release, neutral density filter, and a polarizing filter if I want to do long exposures, anything like that. And then in the inside is where the beast lives. So I have to use the adapter, right? Because it's an EF lens. And I'm going to put it on an R body. So this is the EF to R adapter with the control ring. So you could program that control ring to do whatever you want. So I'm going to put it on the EOS R3. And everybody makes an adapter. Nikon makes an adapter, so the Z9. And then just line it up and it's seamless, right? Once it's on. Good. Now I can handhold this. This is only 6 pounds versus my first 600 is 13.5 pounds, right? So I can at times walk around if it's bright out and just handhold it and carry it. But more often than not, I'll always have the monopod because I don't want to get out in the field and wish I had some support to be steady on. So then we mount this on your gimbal, and then we're going to balance it. And what I mean by balance is we want this to be neutral when we let it go. See right now, it drifts to the back, right? We want it to stay perfectly still and level. So now I'm going to shift it forward. Oh, too far forward, right? We're just going to get it balanced. Now you have to rebalance it if you add an extender on there. There we go. So now it's neutral. And now free mobility. Super easy to track anything, right? Very easy to track birds in flight. So I could plug this in, and then you could see through the viewfinder, right? Do that. Do I want to show you the menus or actually through the lens? Which would you rather see? There's two different cables. If I show you through the lens, we're not going to photograph anything in here. That's this cable. But if you want to see the buttons, then I could put it this way. Oh no, I had the right cable. The HDMI, correct? To show the menu, yeah. This is to show the files. All right. Plug this in. And if you ever walk away from your camera and you're out, let's say for your eagle outing that's coming up, don't lock it down, because I've seen a gust of wind come and take someone's camera, knock it over. Let it flow. So what'll happen is it'll be like a weather cone, weather flag, and it'll just stay with the wind and it won't get knocked over. All right, plug that in. There we go, plugged into the R3. And which connection did I do? 3? I did, there we go. Now you can see the menu. So the way I set everything up, this is gonna be a little fun. Wrong button. Is I have 2 cards, so that's where I start off first. Full RAW and large JPEG. That's a choice. Some people like to shoot raw. It's probably faster frame rate, but the thing is so fast on frame rate that I don't need it any faster because it has to process the JPEG. I'm just getting the large JPEG as a backup, right? This was a workflow that I did with the R5 because the files are so big. So I shot to the second card JPEG just so I could photograph all day long on that second card and not worry about it. But you could go raw. It's nice to have a backup. So that's what I do. Here's your frame rate, high speed plus, continuous, self-timer. So when I start off, for birds in flight, I'm gonna go high speed plus. And white balance, I always dial it in to what I see. So 99% of the time, it is in Kelvin. So if we're out at Lock and Dam and it's a bright sunny day, there's a lot of blue. You get blue light reflecting off of the water, right? Bright blue sky. If it's an overcast day like today was, then I'm about 7,000, 7,500 degrees Kelvin. But if it's blue, I'm not daylight because then all my images are a little too blue for me. I like warm toned images. And the white feathers on the eagle's head start to get a bluish tint to it. I don't do auto white. 99% of the time I don't. It works. But again, from frame to frame to frame and scene to scene to scene, going back to what Chaz says, same light, same exposure. So the color's not changing either, but it will if you leave it in auto white. The minute you go from the sky to, there's a bird in front of that woodsy background over there, it's a different color temperature. I want consistency on the back end. I'm used to being edited by an editor because I come from newspaper and magazines, editorial world, so I want consistency. I don't want to be frustrated. And it even matters if you're trying to lift and stamp, like say you correct one and apply it to the rest. If it's an auto white, they're still slightly different unless you put in the Kelvin, right? Because there's different information in each file for it to read. Your picture styles, so I go for sharp JPEG. Oftentimes I like to pick fine detail, but if you're looking to get the most accurate exposure information, meaning what your highlights are seeing and what the shadows are, I would put this in neutral or faithful. And you'll see a difference because what you're actually seeing in the electronic viewfinder and on the back of the screen is a JPEG preview, the readout from the image sensor. When you do the review of the photograph, that's a JPEG preview, not the raw. So the histogram information you're seeing is from the JPEG preview. So there's more information in the raw file if you choose faithful or neutral, right? Because that histogram is now wider because it's reading what a JPEG would be. That's its reference point. So again, those are just different things for you to test and set up. Auto works great. Manual mode. And this is where I would start off my day. So 2,000th of a second, aperture 6.3. And I know just from being out at the Lock and Dam, be right about 6:40 if it's a daylight sunny day. So that's bright sunlight is the same every day, right? Those little Sunny 16 rules, if you could find one from the Kodak box online, they work. You know, and then you adjust your exposure for there. So for me, this is so fast and so intuitive. So let's say the bird lands and I want some more depth of field. And so not messing with the shutter, I want to get up to F11. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 clicks, right? All I got to do is 5 clicks on my ISO. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Same exposure. You don't even have to look through it and check it and review it unless you're getting inconsistent light, meaning the sun comes out from the clouds and goes behind the clouds. But if it's just all cloudy condition, overcast, same light, same exposure, right? Chaz said that so well. Sure, you could do auto ISO, but then again, you're going to play exposure variables because again, down low, it's dark, up high, it's bright, and the exposure we really want is for the subject. So expose for the tones that are important to you. And for me, that's the eagle. That's the feathers, all that. So again, here would be my starting point. And it's about 640. And I would go from there. Now, that's what I was saying before is, I'm looking, here we go. Here's where you can customize everything. Customize your buttons and what they do and all your different settings. So all your cameras have that capability, right? So I set things up for that. Questions, thoughts? No? So let's do this. Hey, don't you have a stuffed bird anywhere, David?
Not here.
Not here.
I do have an owl.
All right, I'm just trying to get some information. There we go. Good, good. So let's go to the menus. And then I set up my cameras just because it's convenient with my menus, things that I do often. So first thing I'm going to set up is make sure I have exposure simulation active. By doing that, what you see is what you get. If you have that turned off, then you're back to like a digital SLR. It's just going to give you a nice bright scene all the time, whether you're over or under. So I want to see what I get. Format your card, picture styles, Kelvin, all those things. Electronic shutter mode, electronic first curtain, or full electronic. So if I'm going to use flash, I'm going to be an electronic first curtain. If I'm going to be just photographing wildlife, then I'm electronic. Then we could go silent mode, so it's completely silent. Here's our subjects to detect: people, animals, vehicles, or nothing in particular. So we'll choose nothing in particular right now because we're looking at nothing in particular, right? Just boxes. So you can see the way it tracks. What's that?
No box setting.
Right? Well, that's this, nothing in particular. So what it's going for is the closest object with the most contrast, okay? Now here's where I take my AF on button, and as I push it, one time, I have a single precision focus mark, right? If I want to focus on this label, the only way to get there is to set it up this way, because the camera natively went to the closest object with the brightest and most contrast, right? When I was letting it choose. I push my AF on button again, there's my cluster of 5. I push it again, my box, right? So sometimes it's hard if you're photographing birds that just took off and it can't recognize them right away. I want to narrow the amount of focus points it's using so it's not hunting, racking in, racking out. So that's where I start for birds in flight is that box, because I could guarantee getting that box on them. And then if I have the added feature called tracking active, well then it will track them outside of the box and not be limited to it. I could turn tracking off. It'll still look for the head and eyes, but it will not track them outside of the box. It'll only use the focus points active within that box. The minute they got out, it's not going to follow them in focus, right? Again, great control. And then this is where everything's in focus. And see, where does it go? It goes back to the closest object. Now there's no face there, right? So it's just looking for contrast and light. We could also hit the info again, and this is what you would see through the viewfinder. Dig that. RGB values, red, green, and blue. Well, I'm in Kelvin. I jacked it up to 6,000. I know because I've been in this environment before that these fluorescents are about 5,200 degrees Kelvin. So this image is going to be very warm in review. But here's what we could do right through the viewfinder. I could hit this button, and I could go right into my Kelvin. Oh, let me hit it again. It's my Kelvin. And I'm going to change it. Hold on, where's my Kelvin? There we go. And I'm going to, oh, wrong button. I'm in metering. Stop it. I'm losing track. I'm backwards. Now we're going to get to 52. And it's added a little bit more blue, a little bit less red. Those boxes are red in tonality. Warm tone. But we could come over here, look at their nice neutral gray. Look at that, all three colors, the RGB values are near equal in length. So that's neutral color, right? So anywhere within here, we're going to get a true representation of the tonality of those colors that are here. The boxes are more warm tone, you know. And then we go, where am I looking? The green screen. Of course, we get a lot of green RGB value, right? And then go back to the gray or the white. See where I'm white and it's neutral. Cool. All right, well, let me unplug this. Yeah.
You're on a gimbal and you're photographing eagles. You do image stabilization on your lens?
When I'm on a gimbal, do I use much image stabilization? It depends on what I'm going for. If I want to make sure it's super sharp, like 4,000th of a second, 3,200th of a second, I will usually turn it off.
Really?
Yeah. Because you just get, this camera, the R3, I do have to say is far better than the R6 or the 1DX Mark III with stabilization at not catching it.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Those blurry photos.
Yeah.
So let me pull up some example photos.
So I'm playing with it back and forth. And I
Sure.
can't, because one of the settings on the lens that I have is for panning versus just stabilization. And I'm wondering if it's actually helping or hindering.
Right. The only way to know is to actually dig into the images and see. That's how I learned myself what was going on with the R3, because I had to go out there, because each body is different.
Yeah.
The R5 being such a high megapixel camera, you got to be really steady because it resolves any imperfections, any motion, any lens flaw, any slight out of focus. It shows it because of the great detail, right?
Because the 9 is a 24 megapixel.
What's that?
My 9 is a 24 megapixel. My R is a 42 megapixel.
Oh, right. Here we go. Let me get this. Come on.
That's better tracking.
Yeah, each body has its own characteristics and is a little bit different. Here we go. Let me get the desktop up. There. I could close this. Okay. David, I brought you out here to where this owl is. It's currently not there. I keep checking on it.
Is that from the day we were there?
No, when we went, it was a cloudy day,
Well, yeah.
cloudy overcast. This is right at 9:30. That light comes right in there. But all of the owl nests that I'm aware of, nobody's nesting yet. But again, I like to get into the metadata. It's 1600 at f10. The shutter speed, because I was on a monopod and I wanted to be more steady. Image stabilization was active because I'm on the monopod. I'm not as steady because I'm on the tripod. And I wanted aperture 10 because I didn't want just the owl's face in focus. I wanted to make sure these feathers were in focus, right? So I chose aperture 10. So, bright early morning light, 800 ISO. It kind of goes against conventional thinking. These are the R3 with the active tracking. I mean, it's just sick, Look at that. I mean, it's like a movie. Now, here's what blows me away is the upgrade, firmware upgrade in the R5 made a big difference in R6, and of course the R3. It tracked this eagle really easy to catch it in open sky, open water, right? I mean, that you can't get any better than that, right? I mean, it's cheating. What am I at? 2500th of a second. F10. Again, why am I at F10? I want that fish in focus too, right? And that's 12 inches from the beak or more to the fish. So I want a little bit of depth of field, all right? But look at the way it's tracking. Because all the focus points were active and face and eye tracking were active, it didn't jump to the trees.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
It is.
And then it flew into the tree. Now, once it went into the tree, here's where I went to, does it say on here? On this, it doesn't say. Oh, it's still in AI Servo, but this is where I used the focus stop.
Okay.
So meaning once I got the focus mark on him, I said stop. Don't keep focusing. Because, I'm moving a little bit like this because I'm really kneeling down on a snowbank trying to shoot through all these branches, right? And it's a precision focus mark with eye active and head active, and look at that. That's cheating. Incredible. Right? Now, these are straight out of camera files. So here's a little bit brighter, right? ISO is at 2000. Here I went to 1600 because I was like, ooh, that head's looking kind of hot. It wasn't blinking yet to me, but I felt like I was really beginning to lose the highlights, but I'm not when I zoom in. But you can't tell that in the little viewfinder. So I was there and I said, well, let's just drop it down just a bit. So I did. I went to 1600 just to make sure I kept detail in there. And this is focusing and shooting through a bunch of different branches and limbs, just trying to find the cleanest spot to where I could see the eagle's face.
You were on a monopod?
That I was handheld because I had to climb up on a snowbank, in that parking lot there, and I had to lay down like this really, really.
Yeah, because you got to navigate your way through those branches.
Yeah. I was laying on my chest on the snowbank to get that angle where the monopod was too elevated at that point. And here you can see the two eagles flying around the lock and dam. This is at 14.
14?
Yeah, this is 14. There wasn't a lot of eagles, but the eagles that were there were fishing and they were active.
Yeah.
So that's all it
It's not
takes.
about the numbers,
No, it's not.
activity.
And I love this personality, you know. And this is the 600 with the adapter with the 1.4. Where am I at?
Nice.
Come on.
Clean.
There we go. Look at that.
Yeah.
I mean, you could see the detail in the feathers. You know.
Clean light, clean images.
What's that?
Clean light, clean images.
Sure. Yes.
I believe that's, I've heard that somewhere.
Definitely. And trying to, again, find an angle. But here's those 30 frames per second, you know, like, R5, wood ducks trying to get down low, laying on my belly. This is at North Pond in Lincoln Park. They're the least skittish of wood ducks that I could find. Wood ducks are very skittish. Oftentimes you have to be in a blind and wait for them to come. But they're used to people in Lincoln Park. So, hey, no problem.
Yeah, nobody knows where the.
But I mean, that's
Yeah.
400% zoomed in. Incredible. Wood ducks are so beautiful. I love the way the new goslings were walking right between the legs of the parents. And the parents were really good because there were some big snapping turtles here. And those are snacks.
Right.
And these are all straight out of camera. Nothing's been done. A barred owl trying to fledge. This was at 12,800 ISO. And I was still at 2/50th of a second at aperture 7.1. So that's how dark it was in the woods. But again, there's no noise there, right?
Right.
Come on, 12,800 ISO? Look, you could see the pupils. Yeah. Its sibling had already fledged, and this guy was like, oh, flapping its wing, can I go, can I not go? And then finally it got brave and took off. But it would hold on by its beak. It was calling, the parent and the other little one were on a branch not far away, calling to it like, come on, you could do it, little one. It's like, I'm afraid of heights. But I try and get that light in their eyes, that specularity. And I love just the detail in the feathers. I mean, it's incredible. Nature's just so beautiful. This is an on-camera flash, fill flash. So you can see it's just a little kiss of light because it's very backlit, and I wanted to balance that out. And it allowed me to get that close. So this is right on a tree limb at North Pond. Green heron. There's the big snapper that's like, okay, it's looking for everybody's baby. Circle of life, I know. That guy was ginormous. Looks very prehistoric. I use extenders all the time. So I'll slap on a 2X on there to get that close, you know. Again, fill flash. See the highlight in his eye. Get a little reflection here. Nice blue. Fill flash again. So that's with the mag beam. Just giving that little kiss of light.
And you're just aiming that right at him then?
Yeah, aimed right at him. So we'll pop it. Let's see, where's it at? Let me go here. Turn this back on. Wake up. I switched you off. All right, so the mag beam. It's on. It's fully extended. Oh, I got they put a new hot shoe protector on the R3. And then we put it on the shoe, and boom. Now we have to rebalance, right?
Right.
Or just tighten up the drag, whichever you want to do. But now this will throw the light as far as the lens. I mean, it won't throw it a football field length, but that bird was about from here to the black curtain away. So maybe, what is that, 25, 30 feet? Yeah, and we're not trying to overpower it, just trying to add that kiss of light to fill in the shadows instead of having to do it in post. You know, you can go over flashed, meaning the flash is more dominant light than the daylight. And then to me, that just starts looking fake, you know?
Right.
So I dial down, and those are TTL, so it's just dialed down, sometimes minus 2/3. Sometimes if you're in high-speed sync, you need to tell it more light because it's actually strobing to keep up with the fast shutter speed, so it's blinking rapidly. So then you have to add more flash compensation. But yeah, that's the way that'll work. All right. Again, a little bit too close. I'm guilty of that often. There was this little action going on, and then he's gonna flap his wings like, hey, look at me, aren't I cool? Oh, something's going on here. There we go. Good. So I clipped it, but it's still so stinking sharp, and the detail, and this is with a flash, but look at the feathers. I just found it beautiful. So I gotta wait till next spring to go back down there. And I like the way the flash adds that little specular highlight.
Right.
That one's better, but I didn't get a good one because I was too tight. There is that mindset, Rick Salmon always says, hey, just shoot looser and crop in. But it was ingrained in me when I worked at the Sun-Times to not crop, to shoot tight, you know? And it's been so ingrained in me, I just don't let that go. But I'm learning to do that.
I mean, you've been shooting so long. It's like,
yeah,
you've got certain things that are just stuck.
They're stuck.
It's hard to let go.
This is a wonderful eagle's nest. So I know of 3 eagle's nests within driving distance, right? There's Mooseheart in Batavia. They're there. They're going to start mating now. February, March, they start mating, right? They have an active eagle's nest. It's right in the football stadium parking lot. And you could park on the side of the road. Mooseheart is an excellent charity. So I paid the $40 for the membership, and they allow you to go on property. It's a great organization, so I support them, do that. And it's amazing. It's a clean nest. Now, this is a different nest. This one is literally in Chicago, but it's a different look. It's a pine tree versus your typical big dead tree.
Right.
This nest has been here for about 15 years. It's active. Then I just found another eagle's nest. I shouldn't say I found it, I discovered it at Lockport Prairie, and it's along the Des Plaines River that goes through there, so it's pretty big. And then there's an active pair in there. The other day I photographed 5 eagles feeding on a fish at Lockport Prairie. Yeah. These next photographs, we have an up and coming, we have 1 spot left for our bear safari. We're doing a black bear safari in northern Minnesota in June. So you got the beautiful forest, and then you got the beautiful bears. This is a black bear in the cinnamon phase. And it's a big boy. He was easily 1,200 pounds. But he's from here to the green screen away from me. You know, again, as long as you're respectful for animals, they're respectful for you. And this is with a long lens. There's no reason to try and walk up and get close to them. Beautiful sunset light. This is the eagle's nest at Mooseheart. And this was this time of year, so they're starting to add more twigs to the nest and get ready. Here you could see the flash gave the owl red eye, but it was so dark. Where am I? There we go. It was so dark that I couldn't get any. It was very flat without the flash, right? And it didn't spook him. He didn't go, that hole is like 16 inches deep, and if it scared him, he would have dropped in and hid. It's just a brief little kiss of light. That's the adult calling to it. No flash, right? In Lightroom, it's one click with red eye reduction, but with the flash, it brings out all this shadow detail. And it didn't scare this adult off the branch. Without the flash, look at all that. I'd have to overexpose, and then the whole background would be gone.
And you said you're doing most of this in silent mode now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you look, which nobody noticed, what's for dinner? And that's what I was trying to do to entice the little one out of the nest. Like, I'm not bringing it back to the nest. You got to fly. Right? So, let's do this. Let's see. Oh, this is 1200. This is the R5. So this is the 600 with the 2X, 45 megapixels. This is punching in with the 1.6 crop factor in camera, gives you that. Now there's a school of thought, crop later, and then you have all those megapixels. Again, that's my old school. I want to see what I'm capturing, not saying, oh, I can imagine cropping it later. So again, whatever works for you, right? So that's taking that 1200 millimeter lens and cropping it by 1.6, which is almost 2000 millimeters now. And we're on a gimbal, and I'm at aperture 16 because I wanted both eagles in focus. So again, the longer the focal length, the more magnification, the greater the aperture to get any depth of field. And you could still see that these pine needles are out of focus. And that's maybe, what, 30 inches from this bird? So it's still shallow at aperture 16. So there's the eaglet. That's full frame. That's what I mean is I am, and I get one frame, right? Rick Salmon has kind of got a very valid point, shoot looser and crop, but this is the only frame I got where I didn't clip the wings. Otherwise, I got a lot of, oh, darn it. I got a lot like this, which is cool too, right? But yeah, no, you want to see wing to wing. This is Bosque. Myself and Scott Bourne, we have another workshop coming up at Bosque in end of November, December. So it's limited to 8 people. We've already got 3 seats sold on that. So this is a super magical place to be. There's nothing like it, witnessing and hearing the sound that the snow geese, Ross geese, and the sandhill cranes make when they blast off just before sunrise. It's just incredible. This is just at the Fox River. This is in Jasper, Pulaski at sunrise. So this was the other day. This snowy owl is out in Seneca, Illinois.
Where at in Seneca?
Over by the power plant there. There's a power plant in Seneca, a big ComEd power plant. And there's 3 of them hunting the farm fields.
Yeah.
This is right over on the Des Plaines River. This is up in Michigan, Rudyard, Michigan. That was the other day down in Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
Bill's saying we gotta wrap it up.
Kestrels, I love kestrels. Fierce little bird, slightly bigger than a robin. Oh, they're fierce.
Why don't we set aside a week?
This is at Lock and Dam 13. So the eagle, they're feathering the nest, grabbing brush, and then flying with it
That's how I found the one in Shorewood.
back to the nest.
I looked up, and I thought it was a hawk, and I saw this guy bringing a branch or something, and followed him back. It took me 2 weeks to find him.
Oh, sure. These tundra swans and mute swans are all around us now. They're all in the area. Getting down low, but again, 2,000th of a second. And these guys need a long runway to take off. So again, 2,000, F11, I want that depth, you know. That's, as it flew over, I wanted to throw it in that, man, it just holds focus. Let me close that out.
Now, can you post your workshops to the Fox Valley page?
I can.
Okay.
So here's, I'll post this link. This is the Bosque del Apache, Scott Bourne and I. He's going to focus on video storytelling, and I'm going to focus on stills. And we had one this past December, which was great, worked out wonderfully. And it's coming up in this December in 22. So yeah, I'll post the links there. And as I said, I have one spot left for the black bear adventure. And then we're going to do 2 days with the bears and 2 days landscaping at the Vermilion Falls in northern Minnesota, Whitewater Falls. So we could do some time lapse and stitch and pans and things like that. Cool.
Well, thank you very much, Bob.
My pleasure. So I'm going to close this off. Thank you, everybody who's out there on Facebook tuning in. I'm also going to post this to our YouTube page. So keep in flight.